Los Angeles, Grammy Awards, February 1989. The Shrine Auditorium hummed with the electric anticipation that only occurs when the world's biggest musical stars converge in a single space. Outside, limousines lined the boulevard like glossy black beetles under the California night sky, disgorging their famous cargo onto the red carpet amid explosions of camera flashes. Inside, the air was perfumed with wealth and ambition, expensive colognes and perfumes mingling with the unmistakable scent of nervousness that even the most accomplished artists couldn't quite mask on music's biggest night. The atmosphere was particularly charged this evening. Michael Jackson, the undisputed king of pop, was scheduled to perform his latest single. This alone would have been enough to generate excitement, but industry insiders were buzzing about something else. Rumors of tension between Michael and another superstar who had rapidly ascended to the musical stratosphere, George Michael. The British singer had transformed himself from teen idol with Wham! To serious solo artist with his debut album, Faith, which had dominated the charts for the past year. His reinvention was complete, his talent undeniable, and his ambition, according to those closest to him, now firmly fixed on challenging the king of pop's throne. These whispers had intensified when both artists were seated suspiciously far apart despite both being nominated in several of the same categories. Handlers from both camps had reportedly requested the separation, fueling speculation that a genuine rivalry had developed between the two Michaels. The evening progressed through its carefully orchestrated sequence of awards and performances. The audience, a glittering constellation of musical royalty, responded with practiced enthusiasm, though many seemed distracted, awaiting the rumored confrontation that had been whispered about in recording studios and executive offices across Los Angeles for weeks. Backstage, in a private dressing room guarded by an imposing security detail, Michael Jackson sat perfectly still before a mirror, eyes closed as his makeup artist applied the final touches to his face. His trademark military-style jacket, embellished with gold soutache and crystals, hung nearby. Despite the bustle of assistants, publicists, and handlers around him, Michael maintained an almost supernatural stillness, conserving his energy, focusing his mind on the performance to come. 3 doors down the hallway, in a considerably less spacious dressing room with significantly fewer assistants, George Michael paced like a caged panther. Unlike Michael Jackson, who had grown up in the spotlight, learning to contain his nervous energy behind a mask of otherworldly calm, George processed his pre-performance anxiety through movement. His black leather jacket was already on, his iconic stubble precisely maintained, his cross earring catching the harsh fluorescent light with each turn of his head. 5 minutes, Mr. Michael, a production assistant called through the door. George nodded, though no one could see him. He stopped pacing abruptly and stared at his reflection in the mirror. Tonight, he whispered to himself, everything changes. The show's producer, a veteran of live television with a legendary ability to sense drama before it materialized, had made a last-minute decision that had sent ripples of excitement through the production team. Instead of separating the performances of the two Michaels by several acts as originally planned, they would now follow one another directly. The audience, of course, was unaware of this change, though the energy in the auditorium seemed to intensify, as if the collective unconscious of the gathered celebrities somehow sensed the impending collision of musical titans. Michael Jackson was announced first. The lights dimmed, and a single spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. For several long seconds, nothing happened. A calculated pause that built anticipation to an almost unbearable level. Then, as if materializing from another dimension, Michael appeared in the spotlight, head bowed, one gloved hand raised above his head. The crowd erupted. Even in this room filled with fellow celebrities accustomed to adulation, there was something different about the response Michael Jackson generated, a recognition that they were in the presence of something beyond mere fame. Michael's performance was flawless, a masterclass in precision, control, and artistic vision. Each movement was executed with the technical perfection that had become his hallmark, each note delivered with an emotional intensity that belied the mechanical nature of the choreography. The audience responded with escalating enthusiasm, many on their feet before he had completed the first chorus. Midway through the performance, Michael incorporated a new dance sequence, a variation on the moonwalk that seemed to defy not just gravity, but several other laws of physics. The crowd's reaction was visceral, a collective gasp followed by thunderous applause. In the wings, George Michael watched, his expression inscrutable. A production assistant standing nearby would later tell reporters that George seemed to be studying rather than enjoying the performance. His eyes narrowed in concentration rather than widened in appreciation. As Michael Jackson's performance reached its climax, the audience rose as one in a standing ovation that threatened to delay the remainder of the broadcast. Michael bowed, his face revealing a brief, childlike smile of genuine pleasure before returning to its customary serious expression. He exited stage right, passing close to where George stood waiting for his own introduction. Their eyes met briefly, Michael giving a small nod of acknowledgement, George returning it with equal restraint. No words were exchanged in that moment, though the energy between them was palpable to everyone in the vicinity. The show's host returned to the stage, waiting for the applause to diminish enough for him to be heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the practiced enthusiasm of awards show presenters, "please welcome to the stage, George Michael." George strode onto the stage with deliberate confidence, the lighting shifting from the ethereal atmosphere of Michael Jackson's performance to something more grounded, more raw. The opening chords of Faith filled the auditorium, the familiar rockabilly guitar riff generating immediate recognition and response from the crowd. But then, something unexpected happened. After the first few bars, George raised his hand, and the music stopped abruptly. The audience murmured in confusion. This wasn't part of the carefully rehearsed program. The show's director, watching from the production booth, leaned forward in alarm, already calculating how many commercial breaks they might need to recover from whatever was about to transpire. "I had planned to perform Faith for you tonight," George said, his British accent cutting through the confused murmurs. "But after watching the extraordinary artist who just left this stage, I feel inspired to try something different." The murmurs intensified. In the wings, Michael Jackson, who had been about to return to his seat in the audience, paused, turning back toward the stage. "Michael Jackson has set a standard that challenges every one of us who calls ourselves an artist," George continued, his voice carrying an emotion that seemed too raw, too genuine for the polished environment of the Grammy Awards. His commitment to pushing boundaries, to never settling for what's expected, that's the true mark of greatness. The audience, uncertain at first whether this was genuine praise or elaborate setup for a competitive statement, began to applaud tentatively. "Tonight, instead of playing it safe with a song you've all heard before, I want to rise to the challenge that Michael's artistry presents to all of us." George nodded to his band, who appeared equally surprised but professionally ready to follow his lead. "This is a new song, one I finished writing just last week. It's called Without Prejudice, and it's about the barriers we build between ourselves and others, barriers of fame, of expectation, of misunderstanding." The band began to play, following George's lead into unfamiliar territory. The song that emerged was unlike anything George had released before. Rawer, more vulnerable, with lyrics that seemed to speak directly to the experience of being judged by external standards rather than personal truth. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing the real-time birth of what would later become one of George Michael's most critically acclaimed works. As the song built toward its chorus, George's eyes found Michael Jackson, who had moved to the side of the stage, visible now to both George and the front portion of the audience. Their gazes locked across the distance, an unspoken communication passing between them that transcended the competitive narrative that had been constructed around their careers. The chorus swelled, George's voice carrying an emotional authenticity that seemed to fill every molecule of air in the vast auditorium. "Listen without prejudice, see beyond the image, hear what's in my heart, not just what's on my chart." As he sang these words, he gestured subtly toward Michael, an acknowledgement that cut through the manufactured rivalry and spoke to a deeper understanding between artists. The audience, initially bewildered by the deviation from the expected program, had fallen under the spell of the moment's authenticity. They watched in mesmerized silence as George concluded the song, his final note hanging in the air like a question awaiting an answer. That answer came in a form no one, least of all the show's increasingly anxious producers, could have anticipated. Michael Jackson stepped onto the stage, not with the dramatic entrance that characterized his performances, but with a quiet, almost hesitant approach that suggested this was not rehearsed, not planned, not part of the carefully orchestrated spectacle the Grammy Awards prided itself on delivering. He walked to where George stood, the contrast between them striking and symbolic. George in his black leather, stubbled and earthbound. Michael in his ornate military jacket, ethereal and otherworldly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence in the auditorium so complete that those in the front rows would later swear they could hear both men breathing. Then Michael spoke, his voice so soft that at first only George and those nearest the stage could hear him. "That was beautiful," he said, the childlike sincerity that characterized his private persona momentarily visible to the public. "The truth in your voice, that's what music should be." The microphone George had been using captured these words, sending them out to the wider audience, who responded with a collective intake of breath. This unguarded moment between two of music's biggest stars, this genuine exchange untainted by the competitive narratives constructed around them, felt almost too intimate to witness. George seemed momentarily stunned by Michael's presence, by the unexpected vulnerability of his words. Then, recovering his composure, he extended his hand. Michael looked at it for a fraction of a second, his renowned reluctance to engage in physical contact with strangers flashing across his face. But George wasn't a stranger. He was a fellow traveler on the peculiar path of superstardom, someone who understood its unique pressures and privileges. Michael took the offer hand. The audience erupted, the spontaneous roar of approval drowning out the frantic discussions taking place in the production booth, where producers were simultaneously thrilled by the dramatic moment unfolding on their stage and terrified by the rapidly derailing schedule. "Ladies and gentlemen," George said into the microphone, his hand still clasped with Michael's, "I think we're witnessing something more important than an award tonight. We're witnessing the breaking down of barriers, the recognition that music isn't about competition, it's about connection." Michael nodded, his expression serious, yet somehow more relaxed than his public face usually appeared. He leaned toward the microphone, his soft voice suddenly amplified throughout the auditorium. "George challenged me tonight, not to a competition, but to remember why we make music in the first place. To touch people's hearts, to speak truths that are hard to say in ordinary words." The audience, comprised largely of fellow musicians who understood intimately the struggle between commercial demands and artistic integrity, responded with knowing applause. What happened next would be described in countless magazine articles, analyzed in music documentaries, and remembered by everyone present as the moment two rival kings found common ground in the territory of mutual respect. Michael Jackson, known for guarding his creative process jealously, whispered something to George that the microphones didn't catch. George's expression shifted from surprise to profound appreciation. He turned to his band, conveying some instruction with subtle gestures. Then, returning to the microphone, he addressed the audience. "Michael has suggested something unprecedented, a spontaneous collaboration, unplanned, unrehearsed. A genuine moment of musical connection." The band began to play again, feeling their way into unfamiliar territory. The melody that emerged combined elements of both artist styles, the rhythmic intensity of Michael Jackson's work with the soulful depth of George Michael's voice. And then, they began to sing together. Not a polished duet, not a carefully arranged collaboration, but something raw and real and utterly compelling. Their voices, Michael's higher, more ethereal tone and George's richer, more grounded sound, found harmonies that seemed to exist in the space between their different artistic approaches. They moved around each other on stage, neither one claiming the center, each giving space for the other to shine. The lyrics, improvised in the moment, spoke of seeing beyond appearances, of recognizing the humanity behind the image, of finding connection across differences. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel as we continue to bring you the most extraordinary moments from the lives of musical legends. The audience in the Shrine Auditorium sat transfixed, many with tears streaming openly down their faces. These weren't just fans witnessing their idols. These were fellow artists recognizing a moment of genuine artistic communion, rare enough in everyday life, nearly miraculous in the highly produced, carefully controlled environment of fame. As the impromptu song reached its conclusion, neither artist attempted to outshine the other, to claim the final note or the climactic moment. Instead, the music faded naturally, both voices blending one final time in a harmony that seemed to hang in the air even after the sound had ceased. In the silence that followed, something extraordinary happened. The audience, rather than erupting immediately into applause, remained quiet, collectively honoring the authentic moment they had just witnessed, reluctant to break the spell with conventional expressions of appreciation. Then, as if by unspoken agreement, they rose to their feet, the applause building gradually from gentle acknowledgement to thunderous recognition. Michael and George stood side by side, neither speaking, both visibly moved by what had transpired between them. Then, in a gesture that photographers would capture and magazines would feature on covers worldwide, Michael removed his single white glove, that iconic symbol of his unique artistry, and offered it to George. The gesture's significance was lost on no one. This wasn't merely a token of appreciation. It was a symbolic passing of artistic legitimacy, an acknowledgement of George Michael's challenge and his right to stand as an equal in the realm of musical innovation. George looked at the glove, understanding immediately the profound meaning behind the gesture. With equal solemnity, he reached into his pocket and removed his own iconic symbol, the gold cross earring that had become an integral element of his post-Wham identity. He held it out to Michael, an exchange of symbolic totems that represented not just their public personas, but the artistic journeys that had formed them. Michael accepted the earring with a nod of profound understanding. For a moment, they stood holding each other's symbols, creating an image of reciprocal respect that would become one of music history's most enduring visuals. Then, breaking the gravity of the moment with a sudden, dazzling smile, Michael leaned toward George and whispered something that made the British singer laugh out loud. A genuine, unguarded burst of amusement that humanized both artists in the eyes of everyone watching. The show's host, recognizing that no planned segment could possibly follow what had just transpired, made the wise decision to cut directly to a commercial break. As the broadcast shifted away from the live moment, Michael and George left the stage together, still talking, the competitive narrative that had been constructed around them dissolving in the wake of their genuine connection. Backstage, crew members and fellow performers watched in fascinated silence as the two stars continued their conversation, oblivious to the cameras and curious eyes around them. They had entered a private space of mutual understanding that transcended the public spectacle, finding in each other a rare peer who truly comprehended the peculiar burdens and blessings of their shared position at music's pinnacle. In the days that followed, the music industry buzzed with accounts of what had been dubbed the challenge, not as the competitive confrontation that had been anticipated, but as a moment of artistic challenge and response that elevated both performers and the medium itself. Music journalists, often cynical by professional necessity, wrote about the encounter with unusual reverence, many describing it as a watershed moment that cut through the manufactured rivalries of pop music to reveal the authentic human connections that underlie genuine artistry. George Michael, interviewed weeks later, would describe the encounter as transformative. There's a narrative in this industry that there's only room for one king, one queen, one star to shine the brightest, he told Rolling Stone. What happened that night showed the falseness of that narrative. Michael and I found more power in connection than in competition. Michael Jackson, characteristically more private about his personal reflections, said little publicly about the encounter. But those close to him noted a shift in his approach to his fellow artists in its aftermath, a greater openness to collaboration, a more explicit acknowledgement of those whose work challenged and inspired him. The glove and earring, those exchanged totems of artistic identity, took on lives of their own. Michael was occasionally spotted in private settings wearing the cross earring, not as part of his public costume, but as a personal reminder of a night when a genuine artistic connection had cut through the isolation of superstardom. George, for his part, never wore the famous glove in public, understanding that some symbols belong uniquely to their creators. Instead, he kept it in a simple frame in his home studio, a daily reminder of the standard of artistic innovation to which he aspired. If you've enjoyed this exploration of a pivotal moment in music history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support enables us to continue bringing these significant cultural moments to life. The unexpected encounter between these two musical giants had ripple effects that extended far beyond their personal artistic journeys. In recording studios across Los Angeles, New York, London, and beyond, conversations about the challenge inspired a wave of unexpected collaborations, as artists previously positioned as rivals recognized the creative potential of connection across stylistic and generational boundaries. The improvised song Michael and George created that night was never officially recorded, never released as a single, never added to either artist's catalog. Yet, bootleg recordings from audience members' contraband recording devices circulated widely, becoming one of the music underground's most treasured artifacts, valued not for its technical perfection, but for its authentic capture of a moment of genuine artistic communion. Some years later, a young museum curator in Cleveland's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame created a small but powerful exhibit centered around the challenge. At its heart were two items, on loan from the personal collections of both artists: a single white glove and a gold cross earring, displayed side by side in a simple glass case. Visitors to the exhibit often reported an unexpected emotional response to these seemingly ordinary objects, understanding intuitively that they represented something profound about the nature of artistry and human connection in the often artificial world of celebrity. On particularly quiet days in the museum, when the crowds had thinned and closing time approached, observant security guards sometimes noticed visitors standing before this exhibit with tears in their eyes, moved by the tangible symbols of a moment when competition gave way to connection, when challenge led not to conflict but to mutual elevation. And in studios around the world, young artists learning their craft would often reference the challenge as a touchstone, a reminder that true artistry isn't about outdoing others, but about pushing each other toward greater authenticity, toward more meaningful expression, toward the genuine connection that gives music its lasting power. The legacy of that February night in Los Angeles, when George Michael challenged Michael Jackson and both emerged greater for the encounter, continues to inspire not just musicians, but all who seek to transform potential rivalry into meaningful collaboration, who understand that the most powerful response to challenge isn't defensive resistance, but open-hearted engagement. In a small recording studio in London, almost 3 decades after the challenge, a promising young artist sits beneath a framed photograph of that moment. George and Michael on the Grammy stage, the glove and earring exchanging hands, both men's faces alight with the recognition of something authentic, transcending the constructed narratives around them. The photograph serves as a daily reminder that the greatest heights of artistic achievement are reached not by climbing over others, but by rising together, challenged and challenging, separate but connected, distinct voices finding unexpected harmony in shared human truth.